In this video, I want to help you understand how mimesis actually works by going deeper into Girardian theory than is usually talked about, I see at least on the internet. And I want to answer three questions, help you understand three questions. Number one, who is actually more mimetic? Because we clearly see the extent to which one is mimetic fluctuates from person to person. There are people like Socrates who don't seem to be affected by this thing at all. And there are people on the other end of the spectrum, perhaps influencers, who seem to be governed solely by mimesis. So mimesis, the extent to which you're mimetic, clearly fluctuates from person to person, and even within one life as well. So how do we understand that? What governs who is actually mimetic? The second question I want to help you understand is whom is imitated? Clearly we don't imitate just about everyone, right? And it's not just as simple as people who are successful or prestigious. Even in basketball, right? Be like Mike. We don't say be like Charles Barkley, even though he was extremely successful. And the third one is what qualities of the model is imitated? Because when we say be like Mike, we all know that's to go out and drink Gatorade or buy Jordans, and it's not to shave your head bald, okay? Even though baldness is just as much an attribute of Jordan as drinking Gatorade. And so I'll start with the first question of who is actually more mimetic in terms of their disposition and desires. And first, to answer this question, we need to understand why Girard thinks we are driven by mimetic desire, or even more accurately, metaphysical desire. And it's because of a fundamental lack. Girard thinks that all humans, but we suffer this in various degrees, have a deep shame, a deep lack, an existential lack within us. We feel a deficiency in our being, that's the language he uses, and we attempt to fill this lack by imitating models who we think have a fullness of being, okay? And so there's a very simple answer to who is more mimetic than others. It's the degree of the lack you feel, the degree of the existential emptiness you feel that you have. Okay, we can break this down even further. The lack, the existential shame that you feel is the delta between the amount of being you want to have, your expectations, and the amount of being you feel, right? Reality. The greater this delta, the more you'll be driven to fill this lack, and the more you will be mimetic. So one way this delta is increased is by increasing your expectation. And this is megalomaniacs, right? These people, they might not seem mimetic, but they're hyper-mimetic, even though if it's respect to specific models. So think about someone like Caesar. Megalomania, clearly, and the story I like most about Caesar is that how he cried when he learned how much Alexander had accomplished at his age, right? And so that's one direction where you can increase your lack, which is you enhance your expectation of yourself. Another direction you can enhance your lack is you decrease the amount of being you feel. And there are many ways that this happens. One is if you experience social shame, if you are not successful, if you fail at your enterprises. And this is the thing that I think a lot of Girardians kind of get wrong, which is that success actually works, okay? Confidence that results from repeated success, from your history, whether it's in employment or athletics or in competition, diminishes your lack because it increases the amount of being that you feel. And so those are the two variables that determine how much lack you feel and therefore how much you are driven by these mimetic impulses. Now there's a specific condition of sameness that increases this lack. And Girard's idea is that the being we want is exclusionary. We want to be the best. It's not just we want to be equals with everyone else. We want to be seen as one amongst many partners. We all want to be exclusively the best. That is, again, to put it very simply, one of the drives of Girardian psychology. Now, because of this, it matters a great deal what your self-conception is, right? If your self-conception is the exact same as the self-conception of your best friend, let's say you're all in investment banking, you're all analysts at Goldman, then his increase, his moving up the ladder will be you moving down because your understanding of being is so exclusionary. Now, so what really matters, and this is why, perhaps this is behind Peter Thiel's philosophy of competition is for losers. What really matters is to have a fundamentally different self-conception from other people. So, and this is something that I actually applied in my own life. First I was a philosophy student, but I didn't want to go into academia directly because I would just be another philosophy student. And knowing my own kind of competitive nature, I know that I would get wrapped in to this sort of academic publishing game. Now, when I went to build a company, I also realized that if only my identity was an entrepreneur, was company building, then that would also trap me and put me in direct competition with other people who, many people, especially here in New York, that share the same conception. But if I were now to define my identity as this kind of weird, philosophy, does some business kind of guy, has this weird YouTube thing, then suddenly my self-conception is non-competitive with almost anyone that I meet. Now, there is a way that this can become a kind of coping mechanism, right? He might have more YouTube followers than me, but I have so much more money than he does. Or, he's better at philosophy than me, but, I'm better at business than him. This can dissolve into a kind of coping, but it doesn't have to be. There's a healthy manifestation of difference, is what I'm trying to emphasize. And by the way, this is why I find living in New York so much more refreshing than living in San Francisco. Because in New York, finance is the dominant kind of pole, but there are other domains like media, athletics, entertainment that can kind of balance your identity out so that you're not just competing on this one singular axis of tech. Or there's a place like San Francisco, it's hard to surf without the guy right next to you in the lineup, talking to you about their Tesla stock or something like that. And so that is one condition where lack is magnified, is when you are competing against people who are very similar to you. Now, this is also why what Girard called mimetic rivalry is so damaging, when you are in direct competition with someone who has a similar self-conception, because it both increases the expectations of what you want your being to be, right? This is increasing the expectation because the model, your competitor, seems to have this fullness of being, but it also lessens, when you lose, at least, when you're on the losing end, it lessens your own being, your own kind of confidence. And so that's a mechanism that kind of enhances this lack. All right, that's the first question. The second question is, who do we actually imitate, right? When we feel this lack, who do we actually imitate? And Girard's answer, of course, is fullness of being. But that's not very practically helpful for us trying to navigate in the world, to understand the world, because fullness of being is such an abstract term. Okay, but how do we determine what that is? And so this is not Girard, this is mostly me trying to build off Girard. There's, I think, a pedagogical story that we can tell here, which is that the people that we esteem determine who has a sort of fullness of being. So let's say I grew up in a household of, hippie parents, and whoever they esteem, imitating them, this is mimetic again, I will learn to see as having a fullness of being, right? So this might be a great guru from Tibet who is now teaching in San Francisco. But let's say my neighbor, okay, let's say he grew up with parents who are in tech, right next to me. We both live in San Francisco, unfortunately. He might grow up with entrepreneurial parents, and their esteem might be directed at other entrepreneurs. And so what I'm trying to explain is how people who grew up in the exact same kind of community can end up esteeming and imitating very different people. Because, again, this is a pedagogical story, this is the developmental story where as they developed, they learn what characteristics, what qualities, for example, being chill or being wealthy or being intelligent, gives a person a fullness of being. And that ends up determining who they end up imitating. Okay. So the short answer is esteem. This economy of esteem determines who we think has a fullness of being. This is also why Girard thinks narcissism is so attractive or can be so seductive. It's because the narcissist esteems himself or herself. The example that Girard uses is of a coquette, right? A seductress, very seductive woman who seems to only like herself, who seems to exist in her very own world, who has an illusion of self-sufficiency. And Girard describes this as an esteeming of herself, as a desiring, not another person, not another model, but her very own being. And this is seductive, Girard thinks, because we, as a suitor, are invited to imitate her desire for herself. So in the case of the developmental story, where you imitate your parents' desires for someone else, we imitate the coquette's desire for herself. And that's why Girard thinks that narcissism is this self-reinforcing loop, because we imitate the esteem of the narcissist for himself or herself, but the narcissist is only able to maintain his own self-esteem, self-directed esteem, by imitating the esteem of his or her suitors. Okay, so that's the second question of whom we actually imitate. The third question of what attributes we imitate is quite straightforward, which is whatever objects, whatever qualities we think makes them have their fullness of being. So the way I like to think about this is in the same way that each of the apostles has their own attribute, right? With Peter and his keys, one of them has a staff, one of them has a sword, one of them has a scale. That's also how mimetic models work. There are core qualities about them that we think give them their fullness of being. And how is this determined? This is also determined mimetically by the narratives around them. Okay, so this is very common, I think, in advertising, or an example I gave, Michael Jordan selling sneakers. He wants you to believe that by owning those pair of Jordans, that you can have a slice of his being. Okay, so those are the three answers to the questions, and I hope you get a slightly better understanding of how mimesis actually operates. Because clearly, not everyone is as mimetic as everyone else. Clearly, we imitate some people, not others, and even those whom we do imitate, there's only certain attributes about them that we do imitate. And hopefully this video, it gives you a better systematic understanding of who does the imitation, whom is imitated, and what about them is actually imitated. Thank you.